But thanks be to God, who put in the heart of Titus the same devotion I have for you, because he not only accepted our request, but since he was very eager, he is coming to you of his own accord. And we are sending along with him the brother who is praised by all the churches for his work in spreading the gospel. In addition, this brother has also been chosen by the churches as our traveling companion as we administer this generous gift to the glory of the Lord himself and to show our readiness to help. We did this as a precaution so that no one should blame us in regard of this generous gift we are administering. For we are concerned about what is right, not only before the Lord, but also before men. And we are sending with them our brother whom we have tested many times and found eager in many matters, but who now is much more eager than ever because of the great confidence he has in you. If there is any question about Titus, he is my partner and fellow worker among you. If there is any question about our brothers, they are messengers of the churches, a glory to Christ. Therefore, show them openly before the churches the proof of your love and of our pride in you. Thus Paul has written to the Corinthian Christians in 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verses 16 through 24. He is in the midst of this section, which had began in chapter 8 and verse 1, where he has been talking about the collection for the Christians who were poor in need in Judea, specifically in Jerusalem. We get this understanding based upon the first letter he sent about how they should make collections for this, and it seems like Paul had talked about that before to them because it seems to be something they had written to him about in the letter that led to Paul, what we call Paul's first letter to the Corinthians. And so we believe that at some point while he's in Ephesus, Paul determined he should go to Jerusalem. He felt for a bevy of reasons it would be good to take up a collection for the Christians there from the church in Galatia and Macedonia and Achaia. And so he's been working behind the scenes to try to get this to happen. And so he's right now in Macedonia, and he's been collecting, and in chapter 8 and first 5 verses, he was talking about how the Macedonians had given not just according to their means, but beyond their means for this. They eagerly wanted to participate in this particular gift, this particular fellowship, using the Greek words Titus and koinonia, grace or gift and fellowship, joint participation. And now Paul has been encouraging the Corinthians to be prepared to do the same, and talked about how they were willing to do the same, and now he wants that eagerness to be matched with actual giving, as he had mentioned previously. Now, in verses 13 through 15 of chapter 8, he had kind of started talking about some concerns the Corinthians might have had, that no, this isn't them being taken advantage of, that it's an equality, that right now God has given them more to give to those who have less. The time may come when they are the ones in need, and perhaps even the Judean Christians will be the ones who will have more to give to them. And so perhaps we're still dealing with some of those apprehensions as we continue in this last part of this, what we call this chapter in verses 16 through 24. Because he's commending Titus and these two unnamed travelers in verses 16 through 24. Paul appreciated the charis, the grace or gift of God again. And all of this is being framed in terms of God's gift or God's grace. That this is now Titus's eagerness, the spuden in Greek, because he was eager, it's the verb form, to return, and that he was going to do so of his own accord. Which means, was the first time when he went earlier, because again, we've just heard in chapter 2 and 7 how it was Titus that Paul had sent with or after the severe letter, and to kind of deal with all of that. Was that maybe less than of his own accord? It's kind of more of an encouragement, like pushing him to go. But this time Titus really did want to come back and deal with this particular thing, to encourage and be encouraged by the Corinthian Christians again. But it's not just Titus who's going. Paul's also sending who he calls the brother whose praise is in the gospel from all the churches. This one is also appointed by the church as a fellow traveler in the service or ministry of this grace gift with us, in verses 18 and 19. We can speculate about who it might be. Paul does not give us a name. We can have confidence about this brother, though, based upon that last line, that he is appointed by the church as a fellow traveler in the service of this gift, that he is most likely one of the Macedonian Christians who is going to go with Paul to take the gift to Jerusalem. In Acts 20 and verse 4, Luke will name Sopater, son of Pyrrhus, from Berea, and Aristarchus and Secundus from Thessalonica as among Paul's traveling companions from Greece to Asia Minor. If Luke's list is exhaustive in that verse, that is all the ones who are going with it, then it's likely one of those three. But Paul doesn't name him. And Paul very easily could have named him. Paul named Titus. Paul is not going to be shying away from naming people once appropriate. Paul may have any number of reasons why he doesn't name him. However, he wants to make it clear why these men are being sent, and that they're being sent so they may remain blameless about this hazrotet in Greek, this abundance, looking at the gift, the collection being taken up, with which they were serving or ministering. And he alludes to Proverbs 3 and verse 4, saying he's giving thought to what is honorable not only before God, but also to people. And so there is this concern about propriety, right? By having these people that have a strong reputation, and why we're commending Titus. I mean, after all, wasn't Titus just the one in Corinth? Why was Paul needed commended? Well, it's one thing to be commended to come and deal with the business at hand in terms of the severe letter and things. It's quite another to give you money. And so Paul is commending them as hey, no, you can give the money to Titus. Titus is my chosen delegate. It might be a situation where Paul was trying to head off we're only going to give this money to Paul type situation, but probably actually the opposite. There's this beef going on between the Corinthian Christians and Paul about money. We're going to see it later on in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, because of the fact that he did not take wages while he was there. And so maybe all things involving money, he didn't want his hands on it all. For propriety's sake, he wanted Titus to deal with it. And also, we've got at least one of the Macedonian Christians coming with him. There's a second man we're going to talk about in a second. Who knows where he's from. But they're commended as faithful Christians that these Corinthian Christians can have all confidence in. Now, in Acts 20 and verse 4, we just mentioned 3 names. There's some other names there, but there's no one named as having come from Corinth or from any of the churches of Achaia. So, again, if Luke's list is exhaustive, it would mean that the Achaeans did not feel the need to send anyone, that they fully trusted that Titus and Paul and the people with them were able to take the money from them and would deliver it to the Christians in Jerusalem. And Paul has had this concern for quite some time. Even in 1 Corinthians 16, verses 3 and 4, he says that anyone you want to send with can certainly come with to see the distribution of the resources. That the entire time Paul wants to be board and accountable, where there's no concern or thought about embezzlement, because you will be able to see, hey, we gave 500 sesterces, and Paul showed up, and 500 sesterces were distributed to the Christians in need in Jerusalem. Something of that sort, something like that was the way it went down. It's very interesting to see that, by the way, that point that Paul's trying to make there, the importance of that propriety. And quoting from Proverbs 3:4, alluding to it, that giving thought not just what is good proper before God, but also before men. In Romans 12, he'll say something similar, right? That as it were, to give thought to what is honorable among all men. And so we have this very important principle that we should give thought to that kind of thing. That, look, there are times as Christians we're going to have to obey God rather than man, as Peter said in Acts 5 and verse 29. There are going to be times, because of what the gospel teaches and our stand for it, we are going to be seen with some disdain or get the opprobrium of men for some reason. And we need to be willing to accept that and to absorb that. People are going to think us strange at times because of our commitment to Jesus. That's just what's going to happen. We need to be okay with that. On the other hand, what Paul's trying to make clear here is that we're not supposed to have a reckless disdain or disregard for the customs and standards of propriety in our culture and society. This does not mean that we just give unthinking devotion to what is considered proper in society, because there are many things that may be proper in society which are abominable before God. It wasn't that long ago where segregation was the way that things were seen as they should be and were proper in many parts of American society. Other behaviors before that we could talk about as well, which are inconsistent with the way of God in Christ, where God is bringing everyone together. So there are times when we should be seen as flaunting those kind of standards of propriety, because they're upholding unjust systems, unholy ways of living and conducting ourselves among people. On the other hand, we also should be concerned with those who are very reckless when it comes to concern for pride, especially in those areas in which what is considered socially proper is consistent with what God has made known in Christ. We're seeing, especially in a lot of churches, in terms of accountability, in terms of sometimes how money is being collected and maintained and used. People resist the forms of exposure for that exist in society for good reason. In terms of background checks and making sure keeping children safe and dealing appropriately with people who commit sexual crimes. and many other ways where you see all of a sudden where people are not even trying to hold the standard which is of appropriate in society. And why would we not want to do that, especially when it is consistent with the way God has made known in Christ? And so we are to give some thought to propriety. We are to do what is honorable in the sight of all men. And therefore we can't just throw off everything as if culture is entirely irredeemable, entirely terrible. That is going to a posture position that we don't find in the New Testament. And certainly don't find here in Paul and according to the way Paul is working in this situation. Paul continues in verse 22, commending another unnamed brother that we have tested many times, according to many things, that he's now spudaion, the same eagerness word again. But now even spudioteron, even more eager because of the confidence he has in you. Again, there's all kinds of speculation who this guy is, and we have even less confidence in who this guy would be, because we don't even have the anchor to think that he's one of the Macedonians. He could be one of the Macedonian Christians, but we have no basis to understand. We don't even know if the Corinthian Christians know him or the other unnamed brother. They know of Titus at least. Paul knows of them all, and Paul has reason to commend all of them. So anyone speculating here, it's just speculation. We cannot know. But Paul intentionally does not name him and has his reasons for not doing that. But he doesn't want to leave anyone in any confusion. He concludes his commendation in these strongest terms. He confessed Titus to be his koinonos and sunergos, his share in common and fellow worker. The other two are commended as apostoloi ekklesion, messengers of the church to the glory of Christ. And in not subtle terms, Paul encourages Corinthian Christians to show them the proof of their love in the face of their churches, as well as the basis on which Paul and his associates have gloried or boasted on their behalf in 23 and 24. That now these three are chosen, affirmed representatives of not just Paul, but also perhaps even the Macedonian churches. And also, this reminds us, apostolos can mean one sent, or apostle. And this time it's one sent. It's a messenger. It doesn't have to be an apostle every time. And it would be unwise to try to suggest that these men are somehow apostles in a sense like the 12 or like Paul. They are sent. They're commissioned people, and they're commissioned for this work. And it's important to see this commendation work, that Titus is commended, these men are commended. It's kind of ironic, right? In 2 Corinthians 3 through 6, Paul's talking about how he doesn't want to go commending himself again to them. But he felt compelled that these men needed to be commended because commendation is something that doesn't need to take place often among Christians, and we do it ourselves, right? When someone is sent, we find out who they know and things of that nature, and that can be taken to extremes. That can be taken to ridiculous levels. However, there is a thorough basis throughout the New Testament of this kind of commendation of why we should trust, because we do well when we trust people that are trusted by those we trust. And that there's time for that. There's a benefit to that. We should not try to act as if that is significantly problematic. Paul will continue in chapter 9, first 5 verses. But it is not necessary for me to write to you about this service of the saints, because I know your eagerness to help. I keep boasting the Macedonians about this eagerness of yours, that Achaia has been ready to give since last year. Then your zeal to participate has stirred up most of them. But I'm sending these brothers so that our boasting about you may not be empty in this case, so that you may be ready, just as I kept telling them. For if any of the Macedonians should come with me and find that you are not ready to give, we will be humiliated, not to mention you, by this confidence we had in you. Therefore I thought it necessary to urge these brothers to go to you in advance and arrange ahead of time the generous contribution you had promised, so this may be ready as a generous gift and not something you feel forced to do. So the question is, how strong does Paul feel the need to commend these men earlier? Is it just kind of, hey, these are my guys, take care of them, or you really need to listen to these guys? That same question is here about in the first 5 verses. He says he has no reason to be concerned about them, but does he? Is that just a rhetorical appeal? It's like, yeah, I'm just letting you know, hey, I've said all these things, or hey, I've said these things, you really need to follow up with them. Because he now kind of lays out the situation and is very honest about it, or transparent about it. Those Macedonian Christians gave liberally. Part of it was because I've been boasting about how you guys are ready to give. And that stirred up their zeal, their zelos, in order to give. And so what would happen if the Macedonian Christians show up and you guys aren't ready to give? I would be humiliated, let alone you. So I'm sending these guys ahead so that everything's prepared, so that everything's ready to go for this great gift that you guys are going to give. So that's it's interesting, isn't it? That Paul is perhaps being transparent, but he's got his rhetorical purpose for doing that, right? He's not above using a bit of social pressure and the prospect of shaming in order to encourage that liberal gift, right? That even if the Corinthian Christians may have their beef with Paul about money, they're not going to want to be seen by the Corinthian Christians just up the road in Macedonia as seeing stingy or an illiberal. And so for their own reputation's sake, perhaps, not even because of Paul, are they maybe willing to start giving liberally the way they're supposed to in the situation that Paul would have them to do. And so it's really a masterclass in rhetoric again. And Paul is willing to open up this possibility. And this is one of those things where, we these days, we're not very comfortable with the idea of this kind of humiliation, embarrassment, or shame. In fact, there's a lot of times we're very skeptical about it because we've seen how it gets abused and how people have not done that, have used that in ways that are not ways that glorifying or honor God, and have pushed that button to the hurt and harm of a lot of people. And that's led to the reaction of saying, well, there's never a time where that is appropriate. And yet, if you've seen the behavior of anyone who's truly psychopathic and experienced no humiliation, embarrassment, or shame, well, there are reasons why those forces need to be leveraged in order to try to encourage a level of social compliance. Because we are social creatures, whether we want to admit it or not, and we do want to have standing in groups that we are part of, and that's what Paul is expecting and banking on. It's why he's telling them, hey, you don't want to be humiliated in front of the Macedonian Christians, do you? And so therefore you should give. And so if Paul is using that as a leverage, then it means that there are times that it might be appropriate for us to do so as well. That there might be times that we should expose that possibility. Hey, you don't want to be embarrassed, or you don't want to be humiliated or ashamed. Therefore, give liberally. Therefore, do these things that glorify God in Christ. But we need to recognize that there's a lot of power in that prospect, and that we shouldn't be pushing that button all the time, and we need to exercise that power judiciously and wisely. So therefore, based on what we've seen here in 2 Corinthians 8, 16 through 9, verse 5, we do well to be zealous to give to those in need, to glorify and honor God in Christ through the Spirit in all things. We're so glad you've joined us. If you have any questions, comments, or thoughts about anything we've talked about here, please continue our conversation in the comments. I'm Ethan of the Adventist Church of Christ. Love to give encouragement to you. If we can move you any service, please let us know. Reach out to us at AdventistChurchOfChrist.org. We can also find us online at Adventist Church or Adventist Church of Christ on many social media sites. We again thank you. May the Lord bless and keep you. Make his face shine upon you. Until we will meet again.